Roots and Routes is a collaborative project creating and sustaining the longest stretch of lakefront natural area in Chicago. Today, on the Roundtable Perspective, Dr. Jacob Campbell joins me in discussing the Chicago and Northwest Indiana area from the point of view of an anthropologist. Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Tom Roach. I'm joined by my guest today, Dr. Jacob Campbell. Dr. Campbell, welcome. Dr. Campbell's area is social environmental conservation issues. He is currently the urban environmental anthropologist with the Keller Science Action Center at the Field Museum. Dr. Campbell, I know one of your projects that you're working on right now has to do with roots and routes. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, sure. First off, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. And Roots and Routes is it's a project that we're working on with the Park District of Chicago and the Nature Conservancy and a host of small environmental and community-based organizations working in and around the Burnham Wildlife Corridor in Chicago, which is the largest natural area in the city of Chicago. And we're trying...
just for a second, tell us what that is exactly. What's that involve? Is this, we all know the Burnham plan, right? What's the connection with this?
Well, the Burnham Wildlife Corridor is in Burnham Park. And so the Wildlife Corridor is essentially, the Park District has natural areas which are specifically designed to provide habitat for native plants and animals.
Sure.
And so distinct from some of the recreational uses of turf grass fields and those sorts of things, these places are restored to look somewhat like Illinois did and Indiana and this general region did before European contact. And so the Park District is actively involved in restoring those places, and our role has been, to some degree, in helping to involve some of the people that live closest to those places in the restoration process. And so roots in the sense of actually literally putting roots in the ground and routes to this space. And essentially it's become a way for us to establish new patterns in the ways that natural areas are designed and used in the city of Chicago.
Is this the sort of thing where I could pick up a map and trail along to these different places?
Definitely, yep. And there actually is a user guide for this area, which you can find on the Field Museum's website. And there's 5 gathering spaces that have been installed kind of along the trail from the north to the south. And those sites were designed and built by teams of artists and community-based organizations from the Pilsen, Bronzeville, and Chinatown neighborhoods, all of which are relatively close to that South Lakefront area. And they're really beautiful places to visit and learn about some of the communities that live nearby.
Yeah. Another project is the Pembroke Township project, right? Tell us about that too, and then maybe we'll ask some comparisons here.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so the Field Museum has been involved in Pembroke Township for some time now. It's a really important area both for conservation. It's some of the highest quality parcels of black oak savanna left in the world are in the Kankakee River drainage and particularly south of the river. And so our interest is both from a biological standpoint, helping to protect and preserve some of these remnant savannas, which provide important habitat for a range of grassland birds and a variety of other species. But also it's a historic African American rural community of which there are not a whole lot in the north of the United States, and it's and so the stewardship that community has provided for this area is one of the reasons why it is continues to be special. And so we're working with some of those local landowners and some other organizations to help chart out the sustainability of this place.
So tell us about black oaks. We all know oak trees, right? I've learned there's bur oaks and
Sure.
actually quite a number of subspecies within that category, right? What's unique about black oaks?
Well, black oaks prefer well-drained soil, and so they grow in some of the sandy soil that we find throughout the Calumet region, all the way down into Kankakee, that blew out from the bottom of Lake Michigan at the end of the last ice age, and so the black oaks are sort of one of the dominant plant species in this in those savanna regions. They like that sandy soil that has there's some topography usually involved in there, and they're a cornerstone for a variety of other endemic species and animals that key in on them.
It's interesting the perspective that you bring to this. So when you're walking around over there, you're not just thinking you're walking through a forest here. You're thinking that you're walking around in what used to be the bottom of Lake Michigan, and thinking about that transition a little bit. Huh?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's a remarkable place, and for those folks that haven't visited it, it feels very distinct from other parts of this area. So yeah, it's a really beautiful place, and we love going there.
And approximately where is this?
It's due south and east of the town of Kankakee.
Okay, so towards Indiana.
It's right on the Indiana line.
Okay.
just south and east from Kankakee.
Yeah. What makes it a savanna?
That's this sort of spread out, interspersed tree canopy. So it's not a dense forest, but it's also not a prairie. Mm-hmm. So savannas are kind of in between forests and prairies.
So there's a network of roots underground that are somewhat intermingled, and a network of branches over the top that are intermingled.
That's right.
Yeah. That's an interesting description. What do we see if we go there? If I pack my family up in my station wagon, do people still have station wagons? I don't know.
I think
my van,
so, actually, yeah,
and our soccer van, and we drive out there. What would you recommend we do?
Well, I mean, springtime is a fantastic time to go,
and
because you'll see a lot of incredible wildflowers blooming, and you might see red-headed woodpeckers. There's ornate box turtles in the region, which are really cool if you track one of those down, and just a huge range of birds that are particular to some of these regions as well. The bobolink and other rare, amazing birds in these parts, as well as just there's this kind of parkland feeling to savannas where you can see there's vistas. One particular place, the Nature Conservancy has quite a few holdings in that area which are open to the public, and there's trails. So you can learn a lot if you go to the Nature Conservancy's Pembroke Sands website. You'll be able to find trails and so forth.
Now, as an anthropologist, you're also looking at the human side of the equation here, right?
Even more so.
Yeah, so tell me about that.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we continue to learn is that conservation by sort of a old school methodology doesn't work. It doesn't necessarily always work for on biological terms, and nor on social terms.
So what's old school versus new school?
Well, one way to characterize a sort of traditional conservation would be fortress conservation, in the ways that you would sort of build walls around a special place, with a biologically special place, and kick people out and try to keep them out. or manage that property in such a way that there was limited use or low impact on that place.
Doesn't seem like such a bad idea, but
well,
go ahead. Yeah.
It is for those people that have connections to that place, or might rely upon it for resources,
Sure.
Or have traditional claims on that land.
I've taken my photography class out to places, and they wouldn't let us step off the path.
Right.
So I've been frustrated by situations like that, but I also kind of appreciate their concern for doing that. Yeah.
Certainly, and I think that's in some ways how the Keller Science Action Center and the Field Museum is positioning itself, both in the Andes-Amazon region where we work, as well as right around here in Chicago, is a higher sensitivity to the ways in which local people are they're inherently necessary to be a part of solutions for successful conservation.
Yeah.
And by being involved in the process, the likelihoods of it actually succeeding both from natural indicators, but as well as for the quality of life of those people that have historic claims there, that those are advanced. And so that's actually how our methodology is designed. Okay.
You mentioned the Amazon region. What's your experience there?
It's just wishing that I got to go. I work on our Chicago team, and our Keller Science Action Center is split with. We do remarkably similar work in two very, very different places, with half of our team working in the Andes-Amazon, half of us working in Chicago. And I work really closely with my colleagues there in the Andes-Amazon, but mostly in terms of sharing notes, talking about our methodology, and learning from each other.
And what's the museum's role in all of this?
Well, the Field Museum is, a lot of people, I don't think fully appreciate the degree to which the mission of the museum is brought outside the walls of the building through a variety of the ways that we're talking about here. And so a future rich in nature and culture is sort of embedded in our mission, and our Science Action Center, as the name implies, is designed to help bring that to bear outside the walls of our building. And so we use our collections to inform the kind of research that we do. We invite our partners into the building to help us curate exhibits and understand and how to tell these stories. But the museum is somewhat of a unique place for doing this kind of work. It's not like a university. It's not necessarily like an NGO. And so we're constantly working to really leverage the assets that we have.
So, but part of what happens here is that sometimes this work that's going on outside the museum ends up as a project that's displayed in the museum, right?
True.
For example?
Yeah, so one of the exhibits that really tells the story of our team is called Restoring Earth. And so it's on the top floor of the museum, and it's an award-winning exhibit that really demonstrates some of our dedication to sustainability as well. A lot of the materials are sustainably sourced, and it's like a bunch of bamboo, and really it's a fantastic experience. But it tells the story both of this Andes-Amazon region work with maps of all of the areas that have been protected in the Andes-Amazon region as a result of some of the work that this team's done, as well as some of our telling the story of our Chicago region efforts and some of our work in Madagascar. That's one, but then there are other exhibits also that are born out of some of the collaborative relationships that we have with organizations and communities in the city of Chicago. We're working now on a revamp of our Native American Hall, which is being done collaboratively with partners from the American Indian Center in Chicago, as well as Native people from around the country. So some of that, and there's staff that work across these different units.
How have museums changed over the last museums like this, natural history museums, how have they changed over the last 100 years, I guess? I know I've been to New York, and they're very linked to campaigns that Teddy Roosevelt had in Africa and things like that. How's what we're doing now different from that, and what do we still have in common with those founders of these original museums?
Well, it's one thing that's still in common, I would say, is that there are still active collecting. There is active collecting being done in most natural history museums, but the things that are being collected have changed, and the rules around how those things are collected.
You would be horrified
if
one of your fellow scientists shot an animal and brought it back.
That doesn't happen anymore.
Yes,
right? Absolutely. It doesn't really happen anymore. Although there are still animals collected if they are not endangered, if if there's protocols with the host country, if it's not in the United States, and so forth and so on. So the collection continues to be this sort of library of life that is actively being used by researchers around the world. And so that continues. I think that the ways in which certainly anthropologists, which I can speak best to, really engage head-on some of the problematic legacies of the ways in which some of the objects that were collected that are in our museum. That's been a very robust process and a very self-critical process, and
robust debate at times. Yes,
very much so, and it's become much more participatory with some of the with host communities where these objects have come from, and so repatriation has become a much obviously a massive part of what all natural history museums do when there are cultural collections, and so I think those are some of the major dynamics that are at play, as well as I would say, I know the Field Museum, in fact, actually just announced a new logo today. And is in the beginning of a brand relaunch as a part of our 125th year anniversary this year. And some of that messaging and that effort is very much bent towards positioning our museum in a way to be able to share how we are taking on real world problems, and trying to leverage again our collections, our assets, our staff, our relationships, not just to build exhibits, but to use the science that happens in the museum to good effect. And so that's going to continue as some of those problems become more acute. Climate change, deforestation, issues related to urbanization, all sorts of things. We're going to be pressed to become more relevant in those ways.
And I can see, ways in which obviously things have branched out, but still at the core of this, you're a museum that's in a city, and you're exposing people in the city to things that are outside their worldview, right? And that's still a rich element of this. Even what you described on your top floor here, I mean, is a kind of bringing some of the outskirts back into the city. If we get back to the environment for a second, in the 1970s, environmental issues were a rallying cause. It seemed like the protest movements of the 60s sort of evolved into concern over the environment, and people were, putting their boats in between whales and whaling ships and things like that. The environmental issue now, it seems to me, is absorbed into organizations like the ones you're working with, and there are, very carefully planned actions that are taking place, and it has a lot to do with education. Talk to me a little bit about where we're at now and how you think we've evolved in terms of how we're dealing with the environmental issues.
Well, I mean, while there certainly has been some progress made, and pointing to the Johnson administration and some of the crucial legislation that came through in the period that you're talking about. I mean that was a monumental shift, and we sort of, that did drive a lot of environmental action for quite some time. It's, you know, it's significant and horrifying to see just somewhat like the Clean Water Act, for example, now being under threat by the Trump administration. Yeah. And things like, you know, Bears Ears and other, you know, other environmental protections being rolled back by very powerful lobbying interests that are having their way. So I think there's a new set of challenges and that this generation faces, but also a new set of possibilities that are starting to be leveraged. And a few that I would point to is I think there have been some advances in the ways that environmental concerns have been taken up intersectionally with other issues of race and racial injustice, gender, and other forms of movement building that are cutting across the environmental activism that's happening, which at its best is really galvanizing the work that's being done, especially by young people right now. And so in that way, some of the silos that have maybe limited some of the actions that have taken place in the past are being eroded to some degree. And I think that's really where our hope lies, and that continues, and that things like some of the work that we do at the museum and with our partners related to environmental education, involving young people with establishing connections to nature in their backyards, as well as then scaling that up to broader global concerns. That generation is going to be even more, ready to deal with some of the messes that we're creating.
Is there a group you'd like to tell us about here as we're closing up? I know you work with community groups. Any success story or?
Well, there's quite a few. I'd be hard pressed to just pick one, but I mean, the Roots and Routes initiative really does a great job of putting small and large organizations in a position to learn from each other and leverage some of those relationships to help the people that live in the city be advanced. So organizations involved in that, like the Sacred Keepers Sustainability Lab, for example, on the south side, has been a great partner. Organizations like Casa Michoacán and Contra Tiempo and others in the Pilsen and Little Village neighborhoods. But I would urge people to actually read a little bit more about the Roots and Routes initiative, because it's actually a whole host, and I hate to leave a few out. But yeah, we're blessed to have an incredibly rich network of partners in the city.
So if someone's interested in Roots and Routes, they can go online and...
There's a Facebook page, Roots and Routes Initiative.
Okay.
The Field Museum has a page as well. If you search Roots and Routes Field Museum, you can find information there. As well as with Pembroke, if there's resources for visitors who might want to go down and see some of these black oak savannas that I'm talking about. Yeah. Field Museum Pembroke is a place to go as well.
Any projects coming up that you're thinking about?
Well, I mean, most immediately, I'm a co-director of our Urban Ecology Field Lab, which is a college summer course which we run at the museum, and so we're recruiting for that right now. It's a fantastic kind of immersion for college-age students that are interested in some of these issues and getting trained on how to conduct research in communities that is integrative of both social and environmental topics and training. So we'll run that course again this summer. I'm getting ready for that, as well as our Green Ambassadors program, which is a high school age program associated with Roots and Routes. So summer's around the corner, and that has me thinking about young people and training and helping people get into the field.
And you were one of those young people at one time.
I was, yeah. And so now I'm blessed to be in a position to, be a part of bringing up the next generation.
Okay, very good. That's all the time we have for our program. Thank you to Dr. Campbell for joining me today on Roundtable Perspective. I'm Tom Roach. See you next week.